What's going on, guys? I wanted to do something a little different today. A couple days ago, I asked a question on our community page of YouTube, or whatever that's called. What I wanted to know is what questions you guys had. So I'm going to answer the question that was liked the most. And if this goes well, I'll continue to do something like this in the future. The way I want to do this is I'm going to answer this question, and if we continue with this moving forward, after I'm done training. So the way I want to do this is I'm going to answer the question for you guys like you were here in the gym and asked me that question. So say it's a meathead answer, serious answer, but exactly the same way it would be if you were to ask it to me privately, individually in a gym, however you want to go about defining that. So that's how we're going to do this. Let's see how it goes. So the question was, if someone was to begin their lifting career in their 30s and wants to enter into the competitive area in some masters and very soon masters, how should one go about their priorities, programming, being in older folk, where I'm not too sure 30s and older folk, when it comes down to, you know, the aging process, hormones decreasing, ability to recover, changing, and so on. First off, when you start talking about age, you know, in my mind, I start thinking about training age. I start thinking about, you know, physical age and all these other things. And yes, hormones play a role. Wear and tear plays a role. Training history plays a role. All these different things play a role. But if you're personally asking me this and you're in here, in my mind, none of that matters, because what matters is you know, you as the individual. And what I'm taking from this is you're relatively new to training and you want to start competing sometime down the road. And this would be the same if it's going to be competing in bodybuilding or any of the other strength sports. How do you go about where you are now and progress into the future? In essence, that's kind of regardless of age or even training age. There's some things that are bigger than that in how to go about structuring this, because in a lot of areas, a beginner is still a beginner, and intermediate still an intermediate, and advanced is still advanced. So it comes down to, how do you define those? Does it really matter? If I'm speaking to you, it's you. So you can't sit there and look at somebody and say, well, you're a beginner, you're intermediate, and you're an advanced, because in some aspects, they could be a beginner in one aspect of training, more intermediate in another aspect of training, and advanced in a different aspect of training. Nobody is, you know, a beginner across the board, how that's defined. So let me back up a little bit here and tell you how I go about this and the way somebody should think about this from the training side of things. I like to think of the training attributes as being technical, physical, and mental. So from the technical aspect, let's start with that. And it's powerlifting, I assume here. So what's the technical efficiency? What is your technical skills for the main lifts, the squat, bench, and deadlift? Because as a beginner and somebody just starting this lifting career, you need to spend a lot of time working on the technical aspects of the sport. How can you do the lifts? How good is your form technique in those lifts? Because let's say you want to jump forward and you want to train those lifts super, super hard. If your technique is not good, you can't train them that hard, because you can only train them as good as your technique is going to allow. So in the very beginning of this process, you need to focus on the technique of the squat, bench, and deadlift, because those are the skills associated with that sport of powerlifting. To broaden that out a little bit more, you also need to focus on the technique of what I would call supplemental exercises, and then there's accessory exercises. So let's just make this a little bit easier and say, what's the technique of the compound exercise? So to back that up, things like a barbell row, I would even overhead presses, I don't want to get into defining all these exercises. I want to try to keep this answer a little bit more condensed instead of being long-winded like I always am. So you need to really focus on your technical ability to do the main lifts right, because until you can do the main lifts right, then you're going to be restricted on how heavy you can train those. You're going to be restricted on what your effort can be when you're training those. So for instance, let's say you wanted to train a barbell row to 80% effort or 2 reps in reserve or what other formula you want to be able to use. That really doesn't mean a fucking thing if your technique sucks. So the technique has to be solid enough to be able to even train that hard to begin with, or to train hard enough. So in the first phase of the whole thing, you got to work on the technical attributes of all exercises, even the isolation exercises, to make sure that you fundamentally can do them in such a way that you're going to be able to train them harder and with greater weight, higher intensities, higher effort, moving down the road. If you skip this, then all you essentially end up doing is putting yourself in a poor position to make greater gains later down the road. So the first phase of that is that. Now, getting back to what I was saying earlier, some exercises you're going to be able to have the technical skills of those sooner than others. For instance, it's easier to learn the technical skills of a barbell curl than it is a clean and press, which obviously is going to mean that you're going to be able to train the barbell curl, or that's why I said focus on the more compound lifts. You're going to be able to train those at a higher effort sooner. That's why you want to put the focus on all those at the very beginning, to be able to learn those technical components, because those compound lifts will have correspondence to the other lifts going down the line. This is a big, broad question, isn't it? The physical attributes, and this is probably getting more, the technical stuff is the shit nobody ever wants to talk about, which is why I put it out there first. Most people have probably already checked out of this video and don't want to listen to anything else, because that's how much most people just want to discard it, or they just think their technique's good on everything, and it's bullshit. Their technique's not good on everything. Most things the technique sucks on, because it's something that it's never perfect for anybody, even if it's the advanced lifter. So that said, the physical part, which I've already talked on, is going to be somewhat related to how well your technical efficiency is in regards to your ability to train at higher intensities, singles, triples, if we're talking about weight, and train it at higher effort. So once you get the technique to a point to where the lift basically looks the same with each repetition, and then the only ones where it starts to get a little bit out of whack are going to be those last ones if you're really pushing hard. That's where you want to be. When you get to that point, that's when you can start training those supplemental and the accessory lifts a little bit harder, and you should, because you have that skill set to be able to do so. That's when you start really looking at your training from a component of where's the biggest bang for the buck, and how hard can you train this. Once you get to that level, which it's going to be different for everybody, and this is not really age dependent, this is more skill dependent. Once you get to that point, that's when you have to start really focusing on recovery and fatigue management. That's not going to be as important at the technical aspect if you all you're doing is focusing on that, because there's not that much stress to be able to create that much fatigue that's going to become an issue with fatigue management. So in essence, that's building your general physical preparedness to be able to move on to training harder later down the line, which is perhaps where you're at now. All that, if you want to break it to the easiest layer is fatigue management. Are you able to recover from session to session? Are you able to recover from, microcycle to microcycle and throughout the full training? Recovery is everything. So recovery, you can take 12 different 30-year-olds and their recovery is going to be different. You can take 12 different 40-year-olds, the recovery is going to be different. Recovery is also a trained attribute. So it's something that you have to be able to manage. How do you know if you're recovering from session to session? How do you feel? Do you feel like you're overreaching? Do you feel like you're not progressing? That's when you start looking very, very close at what that programming is to move forward. As training age increases, so should physical capacity, but there's always a point of diminishing returns, and you have to have some type of phasic structure to your training, which we have other videos on the channel about that. There's podcasts that we've done just on the managing the training of an annual plan and so forth. Then there's the mental aspect. So the mental aspect definitely is going to be different amongst each individual as well, because part of this question was about priorities. I don't know what somebody's priorities are going to be. So your priority for training could be completely different than somebody else's priority for training, which is going to change how the training is going to be. And it's because that's going to be able to, if it's a higher priority where you just basically don't give a fuck about a whole lot of other stuff, then you're going to be able to recover better, because you're going to have more time to basically just lay around, rest, and recovery management. The stress is going to be a little bit lower, which is going to allow for better recovery as well. So what I'm trying to say here is all these things need to be thought of not on what should a 30-year-old do, or a 40-year-old do, or a 50-year-old do. It should be, what should you do? So that's the first part of this. Once you figure out that, then where are you at now in regards to the main lifts, supplemental lifts, and accessory lifts? Would you say that you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced? Or an easier way to explain this, I like a scale of shit, suck, good, great. So this compound lift, go back to the bent over row. Does your bent over row, does it just look like shit? Or does it suck? Or is it good? Or is it great? So just kind of put those all into focus. And then those lifts that you suck at, you want to try to get all your lifts to a point where they're good. When they're good, then you can start looking at more of the different ways, phasic structure ways, to be able to push that lift moving forward with the different training programs, how you're going to cycle lifts, the things that are in those other videos. What I'm trying to do is to provide more of a global answer to this, because you're going to get lost in all the nuances of all this instead of just looking internally and saying, where am I right now? How do I recover right now? Where do I want to be? Once you start thinking along those lines, then how do you get from A to B to C moving forward that way? When you start thinking about it in that sense, then dial it back and say, okay, what are my technical attributes associated with where I want to go? What are the physical attributes associated with where I need to go? How do we progress those, or how do you progress those? And then when you look at the mental attributes, that's where lifestyle comes into play. That's where, consistency comes into play. That's where discipline comes into play. That's where all those other things come into play. And you have to do a self-assessment of this as well, because where is that based upon where this is in a priority of your life? Everybody knows that this has to have consistency, but where will your consistency be based upon where it is as a priority? There's no right or wrong. There's only defining where it is, because when you define where it is, then you're in a better place to be able to see how to move it forward. That's how I'd answer it if you were standing here. But on the opposite end of that, I'd also be able to have follow-up questions to this to be able to move forward. If this is something you guys would like to see me do more of, let me know. I can continue to put questions in the community page to be able to answer the questions that you guys would like. This is very simple to do. Put it up, see what happens. If you guys Like this, comment below, let me know it's something that you would like to do. As always, share the video, like the video, whatever else you're supposed to do with the video, do. I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Out.